Right now on Upfront.
Solidifying the race.
I'll say I don't take a single vote for granted.
Former Lieutenant Governor Mandela Barnes officially entering the race for governor.
Do you consider yourself the front runner?
Now the impact and the fallout. The other Democratic candidates downplaying the move.
I don't think it changed anything.
I think it's good to have a robust primary.
And the criticism, even from some Democrats, intensifying. With us this Sunday, our new interview, Mandela Barnes in studio with us. Then, Democratic strategist Tanya Bjork on the impact.
Funding threats.
To root out this fraud and to protect the American taxpayer.
The Trump administration threatening to withhold money used to administer food share benefits in Wisconsin.
They're looking for ways to get out of doing it.
Plus, the intensifying debate on Capitol Hill over Obamacare subsidies, with the deadline now just weeks away. With us from Washington, Republican Congressman Glenn Grothman.
And Deck the Halls, the Wisconsin man bringing us inside as he decorates the White House for Christmas, with celebrations underway from Washington to Wisconsin.
This is Upfront with Jaron Jordan and political director Matt Smith.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. The highly anticipated announcement made official this past week, now shaking up the Democratic race for governor. Former Lieutenant Governor Mandela Barnes launching his campaign, and in his launch video, immediately going after President Donald Trump. Barnes kicking off his campaign this past week with stops in Wauwatosa, Madison, and Green Bay.
He lost his 2022 bid for U.S. Senate to Republican Senator Ron Johnson, and now joins nearly a half dozen other Democrats already in the race. Current Lieutenant Governor Sarah Rodriguez, Milwaukee County Executive David Crowley, State Senator Kelda Roys, State Representative Francesca Hong, and former WEDC CEO Missy Hughes. Former Department of Administration Secretary Joel Brennan is also considering a bid as well.
With that, Mandela Barnes joins us now in studio. Welcome back to the show.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
We just listed off the other Democratic candidates in this race right now. Are you the most liberal of the candidates?
Oh, man, this isn't about political ideology. I got a lot of respect for everybody who's running, a lot of friends who are running. But my focus on it is on improving life for people all across Wisconsin. During my time as a lawmaker, during my time as lieutenant governor, it's been focused on improving quality of life. People have been dealt a terrible hand. We're in a crisis moment, and Donald Trump has made things worse for people. And it is my goal to do everything we can to lower costs on day one. That is my focus. It is making sure that our small family farmers, our small business owners, and working class families in general have a shot at the American dream.
You do have to win the primary first, though. So
sure.
What is your lane in the Democratic primary?
Well, again, I am focused on the broadest appeal of the people of Wisconsin, and my eyes are actually focused on November. We're making sure that we have everything, every resource ready to take on Tom Tiffany, because he is the likely nominee, calling out his extremism, his ridiculousness, and his fealty to Donald Trump, which has in turn led to things becoming worse and worse for people in Wisconsin.
You're that confident no other Democrat can beat you?
It's not about confidence. I'm going to tell you right now, I'm going to work harder than anybody. I have a lot of respect. I take every challenger. I take it completely seriously. I, again, have respect for, I am friends with the people who are running, but my focus is on Tom Tiffany. It's not about any other Democrat in this primary, and I hope that's the case for them as well.
You said this past week that you're not taking any vote for granted. The Milwaukee Courier, black-owned newspaper, which endorsed you in your 2022 Senate run, recently said this about you. Mandela had his opportunity. He didn't close, and that means it's time for a new chapter. We need a candidate who can unite the state and win. Mandela showed us he can't. How do you respond to that?
Well, they did support me in the general election. And again, I don't take a single vote for granted. I've spent my time organizing, trying to increase voter turnout, not just in Milwaukee, all across the state, but specifically where we have seen a decline in black voter participation since 2012. It's something we sought to remedy. And in the last three elections, the two Supreme Court races and the presidential race, we saw a steady increase in voter turnout in Milwaukee. Milwaukee had the highest voter turnout of the 50 largest cities in the entire country. I'm proud to have been a part of that.
Why do you think they wrote that about you?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to tell. Some people have, favorites, and that's fine. This is a primary election. I think that people should have options. I think that is the beauty of democracy. I truly think these kind of primaries are healthy because we get to express ideas and most importantly, express a vision. And that's why I'm taking my vision all across Wisconsin to every corner, to every pocket, to every community. And I'm talking about our plan to improve quality of life, which includes expansion of Badger Care on day one, which includes closing those loopholes loopholes that allow the wealthiest in our community to get away without paying their fair share and to provide some middle income tax relief.
Congressman Tiffany had this to say about you this past week. Mandela Barnes is a dangerous far-left extremist who wants to defund the police, end cash bail, and abolish federal law enforcement. Are those true statements?
Well, Tom Tiffany is a person who has zero ideas and zero vision for Wisconsin. I've made it very clear I don't support defunding the police. I want to make sure that our communities and our law enforcement officers have the resources they need to keep our communities safe. And I'm not going to have the issue of crime explained to me because I have felt this very deeply and very personally. I have lost friends to gun violence, lost my first friend to gun violence my freshman year of high school. And this has been a refrain that has not stopped in my life. There has been more friends than I care to count. My story is not unique. There are so many others across this state and across this country who have had to deal with that pain. And that's one of the main reasons I ran for office in the first place.
If ICE expanded operations, the Trump administration here in Wisconsin, say to Milwaukee, how would you respond as a governor?
Well, let me tell you, if there are instances where there are violent criminals who are not here legally, of course, they should be deported. But what we're seeing is a brazen show of force and an abuse of power. We have masked men who are showing up to houses of worship, who are showing up to schools, and they are taking away members of our community. There is a complete lack of accountability, and we are also seeing U.S. citizens have their livelihoods and their freedom put at risk because they may look like they don't belong here. That's completely unacceptable.
But if they are in the country illegally, should they be deported?
If they have committed a violent crime—
Let's say they haven't committed a crime.
Well, that's why we need comprehensive immigration reform, because there are people who are contributing to our society. And if we have people who are contributing to our society, doing the right thing, contributing to our economy, making Wisconsin a better place to live, easing the burden for the rest of us, then we need a path to citizenship, and that requires comprehensive immigration reform.
Would you sign legislation to end cash bail in Wisconsin?
Well, that's not my focus. What I have been focused on as a legislator is making communities safe. That means a person who has the money to buy their way out of jail should not be able to do so. And this is a mischaracterization from people like Tom Tiffany. I don't believe that a person should commit a crime and just be able to pay their way out of jail. It's not fair. It is an unequal system, again, that has led to issues of our communities being less safe.
There have been proposals before, though, so if a bill came to your desk and sat before you, would you sign it?
Well, it would determine it upon the specifics of that bill. Like, I don't believe people should just— this is not about ending cash bail. This is about a person who has committed a crime and the severity of that crime. If you've committed a severe crime, you should be detained, you should be held behind bars. And when your court day comes, that person will see their fate. And if it were people— or if people like Tom Tiffany took the time to understand the actual law or actual legislation, instead of just trying to push political points and try to use scare tactics, he would understand that people shouldn't just be able to pay their way out of jail because they have a lot of money.
You've talked a lot about your priorities in these first days. Would taxes go up under a Barnes administration?
Actually, taxes would go down for working class households. And the problem is the loopholes that allow the wealthiest in our society, the richest people, billionaires in this country, they've gotten away without paying their fair share. And for every tax loophole that exists for billionaires, that is a tax increase on working class households. And if these companies, these corporations that are making money hand over fist continue to do so at this rate, that is creating enormous inequality in our country, everybody's going to pay that price as a result. So this is about bringing down taxes for working class and middle class households.
So taxes go up on corporations, and do you have a number on what you consider wealthy in Wisconsin?
Well, again, we're talking about the most wealthy, and we can look at even reforming the agriculture and manufacturing tax credit, because our small businesses deserve a slice of that pie. Our family farmers deserve a slice of that pie. We shouldn't have the outsized amount of tax benefit going to out-of-state companies. It's not fair to Wisconsin. We need to be in the driver's seat, and we need leaders who understand the need to put Wisconsinites first. I'm very confident we can get there.
It is a long road ahead. Mandela Barnes, one of his first stops here. We appreciate your time. Best of luck on the campaign trail.
Perfect. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
There's the old saying, there are no second acts in politics, and Marquette Law School poll director Charles Franklin confirmed that for us, at least in a statewide race for governor and U.S. Senate. There have been no second acts in Wisconsin in the past 27 years. Think Tom Barrett for governor, Tim Michels, Senate and governor, Russ Feingold, Senate in 2010 and 2016, and Eric Hovde, Senate and governor.
So is Mandela Barnes the one to break the streak? Tanya Bjork is a Democratic strategist. She joins us now. Hey, Tanya, good to see you. Welcome back to the show.
Thanks.
Let's start with the Mandela launch. I'm curious, as you're watching at this moment, handicap, so to speak, strengths, weaknesses, as Mandela Barnes now enters this race.
Yeah, well, I think, Mandela Barnes is the long-awaited candidate, although we thought he might be the last candidate to announce, but it sounds like there might be another one coming up next week. We might talk about that later. But I know a lot of people I think Mandela starts this race as a very strong candidate. He's got some name ID. He's got the ability to raise a lot of money. And as you and I both know, and we all know, that the ability to raise money is a really big part of this, particularly when there's, 7 candidates or to be 7 candidates in this field. So, he did, as you just mentioned, that Charles had the numbers about second time running. He did run before. I know a lot of people think that that's a negative, and it might turn out to be. But I personally think that that's a positive, because he does have a ready-made list of donors to tap right away and supporters across the state. So and the name ID. So if he is able to raise the money, like I think a lot of people think he is, I do think that he is the front runner.
I was going to say, yeah, I mean, we just heard Mandela talk about Tom Tiffany nonstop, saying he's going to focus on the generals. So realistically, how much of a wide open primary is this as we sit here in December?
Well, yeah, the key point is we sit here in December. I mean, there are 5 months before we even file for nomination papers. So that's a lot of time for this field to get even a little bit bigger. It looks like Joel Brennan is getting in the race next week, and it likely is going to get smaller as candidates start to kind of weed themselves out. But I couldn't be more, sort of proud of the diverse background of candidates that we have. They all have a story to tell. And I actually think, too, that a robust primary will actually help Democrats. I know there's some debate as whether we should have a robust primary or not. And my view is that this primary helps us communicate with voters early on the differences between Democrats and Republicans. So done correctly, which means no food fight, done correctly, I think this primary sets us up for a bit of a head start in general.
I was going to say, when you say robust, what does that mean? Does that mean going after each other?
I will say robust means a lot of good candidates with some healthy resources to be able to communicate. That's what I would call robust.
So what are you going to be watching over these next couple months most closely to see who can make it and who can't ahead of August?
Yeah, well, it's always the money, right? It's the money. I think it's the endorsements. And I think it's the way that these candidates put together their campaigns and how robust their campaigns are, too. So, but as you and I both know, communication, being able to communicate your message is really what's important here. And that really just means how much money are you going to raise and how are you going to be able to communicate?
A long road ahead. Democratic strategist Tanya Bjork. Tanya, like always, hey, thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Coming up, the threat to withhold federal funds to administer food share benefits. Plus, looming debate over Obamacare subsidies in Washington. Congressman Glenn Grothman is standing by from Capitol Hill. Next.